So Sunday over at Truist Park saw the end of so many streaks. Of course, no more series wins in a row. There would have been 12, but unfortunately, the White Sox spoiled that on Sunday with an 8-1 win over the Braves. Also, the Braves had a franchise record 28 games in a row where they hit a home run. No home run on Sunday as well. That one RBI came from a Matt Olson single, if you will, that one run on the board. And of course, another streak was 7-0 this season when the Braves had an opportunity in 3-game series to close out in that third game. They took an L, but I don't think that's a reason to panic, Jarvis, because I think we still saw a lot in the series that was still positive and that was still consistent with what you saw pre All-Star. But the one thing that maybe kind of concerned me was that we might be back in that space of, okay, we're getting there because Max Fried had a nice rehab assignment, scoreless rehab assignment on Saturday, but then Colby Allard goes down with arm tightness. And so it just makes you think. And of course, we know that they're being really cautious with AJ Minter kind of day to day. And so I looked at that and I'm thinking, okay, they're not in super duper trouble, right?
Right.
It's not to a point where we should panic because they're still everywhere that they need to be in first place. ERA, whip, F war, which I said, okay, what the heck is F war? I'm learning something new every
Of
day.
course, yeah.
Great.
It's a
Yeah,
new stat every day
baseball
when it comes to
terminology
baseball.
switches up on you, right? But the
Yeah.
F war, as it relates to pitching, is offensive, defensive, base running contributions, all of those things that they kind of roll into one. And then of course, field independent pitching, which means, hey, if you're out there helping with the infield to mitigate home runs to the extent that you can, getting strikeouts, getting walks, and avoiding hit by pitches. The
Hmm.
Braves do all of it, and they
Right.
do it at the highest level. They are still what, eight? I think I checked 8 games, 8.5 games ahead of the Marlins. They
Yeah.
are still about 8 games ahead of the Dodgers in the National League, thanks to them losing in extras to the Mets. Still in a good place and in good standing. But do you feel like maybe some of these injuries are maybe making Alex Anthopoulos think as he gets closer to the trade deadline that maybe there needs to be some additions, whether it's to the bullpen or the starting staff?
I think there needs to be to answer your question. I think there needs to be some additions made to this squad, right? But not because they have to. I don't think
Yes.
they have to. I feel like they are in a space where you don't want to get to a space where you have to, and you don't have and the NBA not NBA trade deadline. Excuse me, the Major League Baseball, the trade deadline has passed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and we know that Alex Anthopoulos has been tremendous when it comes to having the foresight to look ahead and look down the road, because what if Michael Soroka doesn't work out in the bullpen? What if he continues to struggle? So I need to go out, maybe make start having a conversation with the San Diego Padres and say, hey, Josh Hader, what would it take? Y'all struggling, y'all stink. See if we can make something happen. So I think that the Braves do need to make those phone calls, and just from a standpoint of, because what the goal is this year. You
Yes.
are the best team in baseball. 30 games over 500. And I was looking at some of the, how they do the percentages of teams making the playoffs, and the Braves are at 100% right now. So,
Yes.
and like you said, you have like an 8.5, 9 game lead over the Marlins, and the Phillies are surging, but I'm not concerned about them at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think right now, Alex Anthopoulos does need to pick up the phone. He does need to say, you know what? Let me start having some conversations now, because I don't want to be in a space where I need a bullpen arm, or I need a starting pitcher, because Max Fried came back and he still doesn't look the same, or Kyle Wright
Mm-hmm.
gets pushed
Yeah.
back some more. You know what I'm saying? So all those things I think kind of factor into Alex Anthopoulos saying, you know what, I am going to go do this right now, because hey, I need to have the foresight, because the goal right now is to win a World Series.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point about the fact that when you look at some of the stats or the odds, if you will, they say that the Braves are still at 100% for making the World Series. And part of that is probably because, listen, if we're being honest, they're not the only team in the league that is having some challenges with their pitching rotation as it relates to injuries. That's actually very common. I saw a stat that said that the average, I think the highest year of injuries was like 489 when you look at a starting pitching staff across Major League Baseball. If the trend stays where it is as of today, by the end of the regular season, there will have been 549 injuries to pitchers in the starting rotation
Right.
across Major League Baseball. So this
Yeah.
is an issue. Yeah, this is an issue that is something that not only the Braves are looking at, but other teams as well. But I kind of like going back to a space where no pun intended, it worked for you already this season, and B, they're probably still doing some wholesale getting rid of players, if you will. And that, of course, would be the Oakland A's. So it worked. It has worked to perfection getting Sean Murphy, right?
Yeah.
So what if you can go back to the table and get maybe a Paul Blackburn? Now, don't get me wrong, got a high ERA, if you will, but there are some other things that you can look at as well in terms. I remember we were just talking about that FIP, where
Mhm.
that number is much lower, right? And so that kind of helps him with his overall ERA. You know, it's one of those baseball terms, XERA, where they're adding in all these other stats that we're not going to bore our audience with the details. But another important piece there is for him, he would be cheap, right? And
Mhm.
he'd be someone who would be under the control of the Braves for a couple of years, as opposed to maybe like a rent player, like maybe a Jock Peterson from a couple seasons ago. So I
Yeah.
was thinking about that, like who could they get that maybe could give them more than just this season? And maybe if they are going on a run, if you will, that's a World Series type run that goes above and beyond just this season, maybe they can look at a guy like that, or maybe they can look at a guy like, okay, and this of course would be like those outliers where like a Marcus Stroman, okay, or a Jordan Montgomery. Now it's going to take you a whole heck of a lot. The only reason I throw them out there is because we know with Alex Anthopoulos, he's the kind of guy who can make magic out of absolutely nothing, where you say, wow, how
Yeah.
did he pull that off, and it could come to fruition. So I like where you went with yours, and I think there are still some options and opportunities out there with what Alex Anthopoulos can do. Now the other piece there is not that you've seen injuries per se at different positions, particularly in the infield, otherwise your whole infield wouldn't have played in the All-Star game, but there are some maybe opportunities for each player at each position within the infield to maybe do a little bit of an uptick that'll help the Braves, dare I say it, improve even more. So I thought this would be kind of cool to kind of look at the infield and ask you, Jarvis. And I kind of started this conversation a little bit with Jamie, but we only went into one player. So I'd love to go into the rest with you, looking across the infield, whether it's one player or all the players in the infield. Who would you like to see have an uptick in this second half? And what would that uptick be that you feel would be, I don't want to say necessary, but maybe important for the Braves to continue to have a stronghold on the league like they have?
I'll probably be Austin Riley because when you think about like I think he's at like 40 some RBIs right now. I have to double check that, but and I would think like they're kind of on pace to be like 90. I want to get them to maybe like that 110,
Yes.
115, 120 RBI range because those are some of the numbers that kind of bring back memories for me. Because when you think about guys, 30 home runs, 120 RBIs, or 40 home runs or 130 RBIs. So those are some of the numbers that I feel like a guy like Austin Riley should be, coming close to, if not exceeding, on a year in year out basis because we know he's capable of those things,
Yeah.
right? Because once he gets hot, I think that's something that you got to definitely keep an eye on. And I think Austin Riley is a guy that he can get up to that 100. 115, 120 RBI. So I think that those kind of my expectations for him.
Mhm.
I want Matt Olson to lead the league. I
Yeah.
know he's leading National League right now in RBIs. So I want him to continue to work and do his thing in that cleanup spot and make sure that he becomes the leader in RBIs because a lot of people had looked at Matt Olson a little sideways, which is kind of warranted when he was brought in with Freddie Freeman, then
Mhm.
immediately got the contract, and people were kind of upset about that. But he's proven that hey, I'm worth that money. I'm worth it, and I'm really good as first baseman. He has a little slip up on defensively from time to time, but like this guy can actually go out there and play, and I think Alex Anthopoulos made the right decision by doing what he did. When you take it all into perspective, looking back on it right now. So those are some of the guys that I feel like if they can need to continue just to bring it up a little bit,
Mhm.
go and step your little game up a little bit, and get your name in conversations with some of the best around the Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I would agree. And going back to Austin Riley, when you look at his numbers, his best year as far as RBI, because that's one of the things that you mentioned, was 2021, where he did get over the 100 mark, 107 to be exact. A little
Yeah.
bit of a downtick in 2022 with 93, but still nothing to sneeze at, right?
Right.
And then you
Exactly.
get to this year and he's at right about 45. So
Yeah.
yeah, you kind of want to see him get maybe to 65 on this side of the break, if you will, the All-Star break, in order
Mm-hmm.
to, because what that means is we don't see what we saw yesterday, where we
Yeah.
saw runner after runner in scoring position, or even what we saw in game 2 on Saturday, where
Yeah.
the Braves with Ronald Acuna Jr. solo shot and Ozzy Albies getting on base, they gave the Braves an opportunity, but the
Yes.
Braves just couldn't get it done.
Take
You know,
advantage of.
Exactly. Austin Riley, Matt Olson, they just couldn't get it done. So I think that you make a very important point. If we can get the RBI number up for Austin Riley, that would mean that he was driving some runs in. And I think that's a positive thing. And also, I would say, in addition with Matt Olson, because like you said, it's probably more on the defensive side for him than anything. I think that with what we're looking at, I would say with Ozzy Albies, it's interesting because he's got his 22 home runs, 12th in the majors. He's got 66 RBI, so he's doing, quite fine there. But the average is interesting because it's only, and I say only, but it's only 266. So I think I'd like to see that average go up a little bit more, because again, that tells me that he's not just hitting home runs, but he's getting on base and he's stretching, right?
Yeah.
And so I look at he had a triple I think a couple games ago, and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of what you want to see, him
Yep.
stretch a single to a double or a double to a triple. So yeah, like you said, just an uptick of each and every player in the infield, and I think that the Braves will not just be better but continue to be the best. So, but what do you guys think? What do our everydayers think? Do you guys think there's anybody? We'll start with the infield. We'll go to the outfield tomorrow, guys, but we'll start with the infield. Is there anyone in the Braves infield besides what we said about Austin Riley, or besides what we said about Olson or even Albies? Is there anything else that you guys want to see from Orlando Arce? We know that, that's an opportunity for the Braves as well, potentially in the second half, all things considered. Hopefully no, serious injuries come back that way. But ultimately speaking, what do you guys think they need to do? Tell us on YouTube by dropping a comment in the chat. Jarvis is back, and he's much better, I admit, than me. Checking the comments. So if you actually put a comment in there, he will actually respond, and we might even talk about it on the show. And of course, make sure that you download ATL Day Ones wherever you download your podcast.